my name is Tanya Nelson, and I am London Area Director at Arts Council England. And I'm really delighted to be able to talk to you about a project, an award-winning project from the Hans Christian Andersen House. I have somebody here who's going to tell us firsthand. Could you introduce yourself and introduce the Hans Christian Andersen House?
Yes, my pleasure. My name is Mette Kielerik, and I am working currently. I am the head of children and learning in Museum Odense. But last year, when the Universe of Learning in the Hans Christian Andersen House won the DASA award, I was a curator with where my main responsibility was the Universe of Learning in the Hans Christian Andersen House.
Great.
Hans Christian Andersen House is a part of a bigger organization called Museum Odense, which also has an open air museum and historical museum.
Great, fantastic. Could you just tell us a little bit about your award-winning project, Universe of Learning?
Yes, well, I would be happy to. The Universe of Learning is the teaching department in the Hans Christian Andersen House. And in terms of the practical things, we are 4 staff members, permanent staff members, and 2 or 3 what do you call them, interns who like we hire in if some of us are not able to do one of the learning tours. We have 7 different learning tours, physical at the museum, and then we have 1 digital learning tour in the Minecraft education. We have a Hans Christian Andersen world in Minecraft education where students can play and do their lesson at home or in school. Yeah, 7 different learning tours. Yeah.
Great, fantastic. And actually, that's really interesting, that whole integration of kind of gaming technology and learning. That's really fun.
It was very, very fun for us. And we have a kind of a very strict way we want learning tours to be in the Hans Christian Andersen House. So to take those kind of strict frames and put them into a game that the students can do at home, that was a very fun challenge. But luckily, we saw very many similarities between Andersen's method and Minecraft. So it was more giving than we thought it would be when we got into it.
Oh, right. That's really interesting. And I mean, I guess that takes me on to my next question, which is about, what are the qualities about these learning trails and these programs that you have that make them kind of interesting or innovative?
Yes. Okay. I think it all begins with the fact that Hans Christian Andersen Museum is not a traditional museum at all. It's like this way of thinking of a museum as this kind of knowledge authority has just been completely, what do you call it? It's become something else in the Hans Christian Andersen Museum. So instead of we usually say that instead of talking so much about Andersen, we want to talk like Hans Christian Andersen. We want to communicate and mediate as Hans Christian Andersen. So we kind of defined what is his artistic method. What is it that makes Andersen's fairy tales Andersen-y? We use the term Andersen-y a lot. Is this Andersen-y or not? So we kind of define these tools he used to make them his. And it is, for example, some of the things he does a lot is he's very interested in different perspectives. So when he tells a story, he makes sure to offer it from different perspectives. He goes into the different characters and their perspective on the story without really wanting to comment on which perspective is the right one. That's up for the reader to decide. We've tried to translate that into museum mediation. So we offer different perspectives. You hear the story both from Hans Christian Andersen himself, but you also hear the story from his hat or his wallet or some of the letters which disagree on the way that Andersen would want to tell a story. So we offer different perspectives, and we kind of let it be up to the guests to decide what do they believe, and sometimes it's hard to find the real answer, but that's very Anderson-y, not to be able to find the real answer, but to just go with your own interpretation.
I think that's really interesting to explore that whole idea of, I think, how we come to understand, or what is knowledge, and the fact that knowledge is simply bringing together pieces of information that you might interpret in a different way, and inviting people into that, because as you said, people rely on museums as being kind of, they tell you the facts of what happened, and actually allowing people to be empowered to make their minds up for themselves.
Yeah, exactly. I agree completely. And that being said, we also think that that's actually how they learn more about Anderson than if they could just see his hat and read something about how many languages his fairy tales have been translated into, or stuff like that. All the facts that are of course interesting, but they actually learn more about him because they experience the way he thinks, instead of just reading about it.
Yeah, that's
because
really
he questions the term of knowledge, like you said, and so because we speak as Anderson in the museum, so should we question the term of knowledge, and what is the conclusion, and what is meaning, and isn't it different from guest to guest?
And so, in offering something like this, I mean, what are the difficulties associated with it? What's the difficulties in terms of, producing this type of experience, but also what are the difficulties in terms of the way the audiences react?
Yeah, there were challenges. The main thinking in the museum is thinking as Anderson, and so in the universe of learning, we thought, great, well, that this will be our way of teaching as well. We want to make an Anderson-y method of teaching. So, of course, this is offering different perspectives. Another Anderson thing is that he, as a writer, is very playful, very spontaneous. So we want to give a playful, spontaneous vibe when the children visit us. But also, as a writer, he knew where he wanted the readers. He knew he liked to trick them. He liked to tease them. And so we want to do that as well. So, of course, the students always feel safe with us, but we want to be playful and spontaneous with them. And when doing that, that means a lot of dialogic activities with the students. Mm-hmm. We do a lot of philosophy with them. We do a lot of reflecting with them. And that scares a lot of people, especially in the museum world.
Yeah.
So even the part of being allowed to do these activities with the students were a challenge, even in-house, but also when we talked about our ideas with other museums. Sometimes even teachers call us and are quite worried about, I read this and I'm quite worried, are they going to learn something about Anderson as well? And we always say, of course, yes, of course. In fact, this is a very complete way of learning how Anderson was thinking. We are aware, of course, that there are facts that are interesting to people, and that we do have a lot of knowledge about Hans Christian Andersen because we work here and they don't. So, but that means that we, again, like Hans Christian Andersen, we are very clear about when are we doing an activity that is about us knowing something that you need to know, and when are we doing an activity that is where your answer is just as good as ours, and where we can learn something from you. One of Andersen's main points in his fairy tales were that, yes, of course, children can learn from adults because we're adults and there's a lot to learn, but adults can very, very well learn something from the child perspective on the world as well. So what we do when the students arrive is that we say, hello, nice to see you. We're so glad you're here, of course. Today, there will be times where you are my audience, where I will be a storyteller. Sometimes I will have to share knowledge with you. And again, you will have to listen when I do that. But there are also times when it's about what you think, and we have to investigate something, maybe a fairy tale, maybe something that Anderson did once. And at those times, it's about what you think. I don't have the right answer when we do the open activities. and I will always tell you which activity we're doing, so you will never be in doubt to whether it's us giving you knowledge or if we are finding new knowledge together. And yeah, that is a challenge. It's also a challenge because it's actually quite hard to do those learning tours. You need to be good at storytelling. You need to be good at philosophy with children. You need to know a lot about Hans Christian Andersen. You need to know something about collage arts. We have learning tours that is about his collage art. And we are actually currently in a very big trouble because one of the students we have been trained to do the learning tours backed out in the last minute because he found it too hard to do. He backed out in the last minute. So now we are very busy and we don't have time to train someone new. So yeah, there are quite a lot of challenges in this way of teaching Andersen.
But I am really interested in the fact that what you said, I think, is really important. It's about setting expectations from the start.
Yeah.
Giving people that sense, because I think that's where people feel a little bit destabilized if they're expecting something when they go to a museum and they don't get what they're expecting. But if they're told at the beginning, then they can be very open to it. And
Exactly, you're right. And the worry, we have teachers calling us who are worried about what is this? This sounds a little weird. But our experience is that 100% of the teachers, when they have been with us for 10 minutes, they feel completely safe. And they're, okay. So they are going to learn a lot about Andersen. And these people know what they're doing. But they kind of need to see us and meet us and listen to our, exactly like you say, list of expectations. And then they feel fine.
Yeah, great, fantastic. And I mean, you've talked a lot about how people really have, once they're in it, they've engaged with this. But are there any other positive experiences you can talk about, or things that surprised you about how people have engaged?
Yes, we are actually still quite surprised sometimes. Dialogic teaching is very popular in Denmark anyway. And our experience is that very many people want to do dialogic teaching. Some even think they do it, but they often, sadly, actually don't, because they ask open questions at the wrong times. Like I was talking about before, we are very clear and very conscious about when do we ask a question because we don't know the answer. But if we know already, we shouldn't be asking a question if we know already. And very many people do that when they want to be dialogic. They say, oh, so when do you think this old thing was found from the museum? But they know, so why ask? Why set the students up to fail? And that doesn't make the students safe, and it doesn't make the student feel like they can say what they think. Yeah. So what surprised us the most is that when we always evaluate with the students after a learning tour, and one of the things we get the most, we just got it again recently, is that when we ask them, what was the best thing? What did you like the most here? There was a student who said, what I liked the most was that we were allowed to say what we were thinking. And that's a learning tour where they were playing in our big scenography, a lot of costumes. There was a lot of cool thing happening in that learning tour. And even so, the student, the boy here, what he liked the most is that he was allowed to say what he was thinking. Yeah. And his teacher interrupted him and said, what do you mean? You're always allowed to say what you're thinking. And the students just looked at each other like, no, that's not true. Because that is very rarely true, actually, even in Denmark, where we look at ourselves as quite advanced in children's culture, and we kind of got into a great discussion, and we were okay. So is it sometimes the best not to say the truth? And so what is this? And there was a girl who said, yeah, adults rarely like the truth. And that's a very Andersen-y point, actually. That's one of the things that he he talked about in his fairy tales as well. So that it surprises us how rare it still is for students to have a space where they can actually say whatever they think. And we mean it. So we talk about a lot of different things. Right now, we talk a lot about Putin because that's what's he's on their minds. And we have a lot of political discussions with children. As soon as they realize, okay, she's serious, we are allowed to say what we think. So Andersen's fairy tales are used to discuss very many different things with the students. There's a fairy tale we use when we want to talk to the students about justice. So we talk a lot about Putin and the war these days.
Yeah, and I mean, I think one thing is really important about what you just said, which is this whole idea. It's not providing an open question just for an open question. It is really putting people on equal terms and saying, this is what we do know, and this is what we don't know. And we want your opinion, because that means you're taking them seriously.
Yes, exactly. And that's what Andersen does in his fairy tales as well, actually. He's very conscious about when do I leave the reader to find out for him or herself, and when am I as an author supposed to give the knowledge. So that, again, it's a very Andersen way of thinking.
Yeah. Can I just take you away from the learning program for a minute, just to talk a little bit about the architecture, because there's a very interesting architecture behind the space, and just how the architecture feeds into what you're trying to do from a program point of view.
Yeah, it's very beautiful. First of all, it's a very, it gives us a very easy start because it's beautiful and it's not what you expect from a museum. So I don't know if it's the case in every country, but usually when students in Denmark are told we're going to a museum, they go, oh, okay. Sometimes at least. But one of the first things they often say when they get to us is, oh my God, I didn't think we were going to be somewhere this beautiful, and this is so cool, and this looks nice. I didn't think it would look like this at all. So it's a very thankful beginning because the students appreciate the beautiful architecture as well. And they think it's very cool that a lot of the museum is underground with the beautiful garden upstairs. And also, I think what it feeds most into the most is this playing with different perspectives, because at one point it looks like you're on the ground floor, but then you keep going down, 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 and then you look out another window and you're still on the ground floor because there's a sunken garden. And when you're at one place in the garden, you feel very big because all the flowers are small, and then you walk very briefly and then suddenly you feel like Thumbelina because even flowers are twice as big as you. So this playing with perspective, this constantly reminding you there's always another way to look at it. And you're kept very much aware, you're kept alert, and you're kept curious. It's a way to keep the guests curious, because then you've just been looking out into this sunken garden and like, what? I'm still on the ground floor. And then you go into the next room and you see that the garden is above you and you are actually in the ground. So this way of again, the feeling playful, a bit teasing. I think that's what the architecture does. It just keeps the guest very positive because it's constantly interesting and it's hard to figure out where you are, and that they think it's fun.
Great. No, that sounds incredibly fascinating. And in a way, I think, tell me if I'm wrong here, but it actually helps people kind of move out of that kind of perspective about museums are about tangible and facts. Yep. And takes them into a new world where actually they can imagine new things. I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about imagination and what your audiences can expect from that point of view.
Yes. So another very Andersen-y method is to leave things unfinished, leave the readers a bit hungry, a bit not satisfied. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what they do a lot in terms of the imagination. So there is a lot of information, and there's a lot of information that contradicts each other, which is very interesting. And that in itself feeds the imagination, because when you hear one thing about Andersen's love life from Andersen himself in the audio guide, and then you hear another thing from some of the curiosities we have in our exhibition, they tell another story, then you are forced into like, okay, so what's the real deal here, and why are they even talking to me, and what is this? So this thing of not there's not a lot of certain information. I think that feeds the imagination. And for example, there is a fairy tale called The Snowdrop, which is about a little flower called the snowdrop that arrives too early. It wants to experience summer, but it's so anxious and it can't wait. So it arrives too early and it blooms in the winter. And there's a place where it's supposed to be exhibited in the museum. But when you come here as a guest, you're told, oh, I'm sorry, you're too early. The snowdrop isn't here yet. So instead of seeing the snowdrop, you feel what the snowdrop feels. And that's, I think that's a very cute example. And it really does something to the imagination, I think, because suddenly you get more of a feeling of the snowdrop than you would if you were just looking at a snowdrop.
Yeah.
And of course, in Villevao, which is the Wonder World for children, which is the children's department, there's a big artistic scenography, artistic interpretation of the themes in Andersen's fairy tales, with props they can play with, very soft, nice, well done props and costumes. But not really, we don't provide a lot of answers, we just provide a lot of possibilities. And instead of giving answers, like Hans Christian Andersen, we like to ask questions instead. So as a guest, you're asked a lot of questions and you're giving a lot of possibilities instead of answers and facts.
Fantastic. I mean, it's been really great to speak to you about your project and the museum. And I think really when we live in a world where people have so much information at their fingertips, it's really interesting in a museum that's helping people kind of manage themselves in terms of that whole idea of how they think about information, how they process information.
Yeah,
and then
you're completely right, because museums have another role now, because when Andersen was born, how many fairy tales he wrote, that's not what we're supposed to know anymore, because they can find out, as you say, in one swipe with their phone. So we need to be something more in terms of Andersen for them to need to come to us.
Yeah. Fantastic. Great. Thank you so much for taking the time.
My pleasure.
And hopefully I'll encourage everybody to come see your museum and do your learning tour.
Yes, please. Yeah.
Thank you.